was nothing like this. There were no classical schools in Park City, Utah, and there are no Christian schools in Park City, Utah. So my husband, being an entrepreneur, said, well, it's time for you to create one. And I said, you're crazy. I'm never doing that. And then I did.
Welcome back to another episode of Making the Leap. We're glad to have you with us today. I feel like we are here as an audience, we're here with them every week, but I feel like you and I haven't sat down for a while to do this. It's been a little bit, so I feel like we're getting back in the...
Sometimes we work ahead.
Swing. We do. We have to work ahead.
We haven't been in studio together for a bit.
No, so I'm feeling a little out of my element, but I am excited today. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a while. I love talking with families, talking with parents that have not just made the leap themselves for their family, but kind of gone one step further to start their own school.
Thinking outside the box.
More than just...
And when something doesn't work, changing it again, and then maybe changing it again.
Yes, not being stuck in just that one spot where I think we have been as parents in the past and not, kind of afraid to make an additional leap if needed. So today we have with us Stephanie Murray out of Park City, Utah, which I think is a new state for us.
I know much about Utah.
I know. I love Utah. I was out in Utah and it was gorgeous. And it's snowing right now in Utah, which I'm jealous of as well.
Wow.
But we have Stephanie Murray, who is the founder of Telos Classical Academy. That's kind of a mouthful for me. I've been trying to practice that, but Telos. And Stephanie, I'm so glad to have you with us, first of all, before we go into anything else. I appreciate you sharing your time with us today. Before we talk about your school itself, can you tell us a little bit about your situation prior to this kind of launch into creating your own school, a little bit about your family and a little bit about just your situation?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. So stepping way back, I do have a master's in education, and halfway through my degree, my mom said, don't be a teacher, find something else to do. She is a public school teacher, and she basically said, run away. So I got into more of the evaluation and sort of data side of education. And then after graduating, I worked for a company in Boston that worked with K through 12 school districts. And some of our biggest clients were, the State Department of Education for different states and school districts, and they hired us to do all sorts of things like data-driven decision-making and to try to make all sorts of effective changes in their schools. And what I found after 6 years being with them is that everyone in education, most everyone wants to make education better, but we all have very different ideas about how to go about doing that. And I discovered that this idea of data-driven decision-making and removing local control was not really working. And the amount of money they were paying us to give them reports back that showed what really teachers and principals already knew, it just showed what a waste of time and energy and money it was. So when I became pregnant with my oldest son, who's now 11, that's Jack, I decided to step away and just be at home. And so my husband and Jack and I, and then we lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire at the time. And then I had a second son 3 years later, and then we moved to Park City, Utah. My husband said, let's go recreate more. Let's go be in the mountains. And so I took my 3-month-old and my 3-year-old to Park City, Utah, and enrolled them in a cute little Montessori school. And I knew someday I would get back into education, but I just wasn't sure exactly how, and I knew it wouldn't be in the classroom. So fast forward to COVID, when everybody came home from school. At that point, I had a kindergartner and just, a preschooler. And I realized that my son wasn't really happy going to kindergarten. He didn't love learning. He, I don't know, it just was falling flat. And I thought, let's homeschool for a year. Let's travel. Let's really see what he enjoys. And we did. And through homeschooling, I found out about classical education, which I had never even heard of before in all my time in education, even in my master's program. And so that is a style of education that is very holistic, which, now education talks about educating the whole child. But it's sort of like, this came before that. This very holistic, like we are a person in the world. God is very much part of our lives. God created the world, and so let's go enjoy it and learn about it and see how it all connects together. Literature, math, history, everything is connected. And so it was just a much more beautiful style of education. We read great books. We memorized songs and poems and quotes. And just it really brought the whole thing more to life. And so I thought there was nothing like this. There were no classical schools in Park City, Utah, and there are no Christian schools in Park City, Utah. So my husband, being an entrepreneur, said, well, it's time for you to create one. And I said, you're crazy. I'm never doing that. And then I did, because it became bigger than me. It just became something that I had to share with more people. I knew that more people would want to be a part of it. So we embarked to start a little school. And that first year, I really didn't know what to expect. And I just let everybody know, hey, I'm not sure what this is or what it's going to become, but join us if you want to, and we'll see how it goes. And we got 20 kids that year.
Wow.
We were in a bar.
Wow. Well, now this, could I ask Stephanie, because when you said you moved from New Hampshire to Utah, you originally put your kids in a Montessori school.
Which is also a different type of education that I was not. I mean, I'm in education also.
Yeah.
Montessori itself is also something that I think more people could benefit to learn from. So It's still different.
But it was a choice that you'd made prior to homeschooling. And I'm curious, we're all kind of learning this ourselves. You didn't initially think about homeschooling. That was not something you wanted to do right away. And I wonder why you didn't instantly. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I ask because I wonder about the evolution.
Montessori itself is a different theory. It's such a different setup from the moment you start. So I think that's a really great question. I'm curious about that.
Yes, and actually my best friend from high school, she lives in Phoenix. She homeschools her 4 kids. And even before I had kids, she was like, you guys got to homeschool. This is the way to go. We, are not racing around, screaming at our kids, where are your shoes every morning, which in and of itself sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
And so it was a seed in the back of my mind, but I thought, I don't know if that's for me. Even though I was in education, I was never gifted at teaching. I really struggled to, just really bring a learner from the beginning to the end through the whole lesson and keep everything. I'm much more like, what were we talking about? What are we? My mother's a teacher, and I knew that was a gift I didn't have. So like most people, I think, a product of my generation and the generation before mine, we tend to think that the experts know best. And we say, okay, I'm not an expert, you're an expert, and I'm going to let my kids' education fall under your expertise. And then I think what COVID did was we all realized that is not true.
So have you disabused yourself of the idea you're not a teacher? Have you gotten rid of that idea? I mean, because this is something that a lot of people that have been in the homeschool space for a long time will kind of reprimand those of us who said, oh, I can't do that. Mm-hmm. I will often hear people who are staunch advocates say, yes, you can, and really you must.
And it's a total contradiction to what we learn biblically anyway, that these are our children, right? Gifted from God. We are the best people for them. And so I think that's a really good.
Has your mind changed? Have you evolved?
I have evolved a lot, and sometimes I go from one end of the spectrum to the other, and I think, oh, wouldn't I just love to make brownies and have tea, and we could sit around and enjoy literature together. The problem that I encountered is that God gave me 2 boys,
and it's different. Yeah, each family is different.
Yes, and I have this memory of me, I have these little alphabet tiles, and I printed out all of these things for my kids to do, and one of them was uppercase letters, and I had tiles with lowercase letters, and my son was about 3 or so at the time. No, he was probably 4.5, and I said, okay, here's uppercase and lowercase, and I want you to match the uppercase to the lowercase, and I'm going to go work with Jack and do some reading, and I'll be right back. And in my mind, I'm like, yes, I am rocking homeschool. If I ever will. And then I go work with Jack, and then I come back to Sam, and he is placing each of the tiles in between his toes. And I'm thinking, okay, I know every homeschool mom has obviously encountered that. But I was just like, no, we're magic. And it's funny, even in the last 1 year, I have realized that I need to stop deconstructing everything so much and deconstructing education. And you know what? you're putting tiles between your toes.
Right.
If you can do the alphabet in order. But I think that's it.
But then you decide to try, Stephanie, you decide then, as part of your story, to try to create a full-blown school around it all, which is sort of I don't want to call it a reversal, but it is sort of a more organized attempt at education than homeschooling your individual kid.
And your numbers are going to increase, and you're going to have the kids with the tiles between their toes and the ones that are going to match perfectly and the ones in between.
Right. And I've also learned so much about education in general because our school is very small. In some of our classrooms, we only have 4 students. And in our largest classroom, we have, I think, 11 students. And this idea of teaching to the middle, you have kids who are behind, you have kids who are ahead. How do we make sure everybody gets what they need? What I have found is that everybody almost needs something different. There really is not this perfect bell curve of I'm just going to teach you this lesson and everyone needs to be on this page. Education is so personal to the child. And if you want to make it really matter, there's no way around that. So in my opinion, I have come to see that it doesn't make sense to have a classroom, with 30 kids and 1 teacher because you can never possibly reach every child. So I have learned so much about education. In some ways, I wish I could go back and just keep homeschooling. My husband said something interesting to me, though, and he said, well, that solves our problem, but it doesn't solve anyone else's problem.
Wow.
And I thought, okay.
Because you are offering an option to somebody who, I think sometimes circumstances just dictates that family does not have the option right now to stay home and homeschool, but yet you provide that opportunity to give a homeschool-like experience with that classical Christian twist to it that really, it matters. And that is so different from a traditional classroom. Even just, our daughter is in a Christian brick and mortar school, and it's not a classical Christian school. She would not have fit well, I don't think, in that. So you are offering something that they're not going to get in that public school or in a traditional brick and mortar school, which I think is really profound of your husband, and it's important to keep in mind.
I'd also want to ask about the Christian component of it. As I understand it, I don't want to assume it, but the Montessori school you originally enrolled your kids in, I don't know that you identified it as Christian. When you started Telos, that was important to you to make it a Christian school. Can you talk about that and why?
Sure. And the first year we started in the barn, we actually weren't a Christian school at that point. Being in Park City, Utah, we are a very unique group of people. Utah is a unique state for the Christian religion. And then Park City on top of that is almost like a little liberal, but very high-performing city in more of a conservative state. And so I was afraid that it wouldn't even get off the ground. And certainly given that I really know what we were doing in the first place, we just decided we're just going to be classical and let's see how that goes. And halfway through the school year, we knew that we were only having half of a conversation by keeping it not Christian. And so we let all the parents know we are transitioning to a non-denominational Christian school. You do not need to sign a statement of faith to be a part of it, but you have to understand where we're teaching from and that we are teaching from the Bible. We have Catholics here, we have Mormons here, we have evangelicals, different flavors of Protestantism. When things get a little bit tense, we just say it's time to go home and ask your parents what you believe and what your family believes about this issue. And so we very much respect the family's role and responsibility, not just in religion, but in all sorts of things like politics. And we still believe that the family is the primary educator of their children, and they need to be involved in that. And we welcome families to come into the classroom anytime they want, just to see what's going on, whether they want to make sure what they think is happening, or if they just have questions about how we teach something so they can support their children better at home.
I think I don't mean to make it sound negative, but I am intrigued when you said when things get a little tense, because I think when you're talking about bringing people in who are maybe not of the same faith, maybe that root of Christianity, but delineate from, as you say, Catholicism, Protestantism, right, or Mormons. Can you give an example? Can you give an example of something that might come up where it gets a little, as you say, tense, and where parents need to... Because I think there are a lot of people out there who think, I'd like to start a Christian school, I'm a little leery about a statement of faith because I don't want to seem pushy, but it's important to me that we have that solid biblical basis. So how do you navigate it?
You have to navigate it delicately, and I think truth and honesty is the best way to navigate most situations. To give you a specific example, we did have, this was a Catholic versus evangelical, 2 kids in a classroom, and the Catholic student said, well, I'm not Christian, I'm Catholic, because her family is a very strict Catholic family. And the other student said, well, you're still a Christian, and you fall under the umbrella. And she wasn't sure about that. This was a 4th grade student, I think, at the time. So the teacher said, yes, we are all Christian, but before we go into too many more of the details of what separates Catholics from Christians, or Catholics from Protestants, go home, talk to your family about this topic. And then the teacher will email the parents and say, this is what we talked about, this is what I said, this is what the students were discussing. But since we were supposed to be discussing Moses coming out of Egypt, I got everybody back on track, and that's what we're talking about. There was another slightly stranger instance where an LDS student said, oh, well, we don't believe that God is a spirit. We think he has a body. And the teacher just said, yep, some religions believe some things. Let's get back on track. And so trying to stick to what the curriculum is saying in that lesson is always an easy way to get back on track. And then to be very open with parents with everything that was said, and to welcome them to join the class or to ask more questions about what was said, so that we can all make sure that everybody at least understands what's going on and that there are no secrets.
I think that's really interesting, because one of the criticisms of Christian education is that we're putting our kid in a bubble, that they're not being exposed to conflicts and things that around them are different ways of thinking. But you've got that right in there, because anybody who's in a church, anybody who's a Christian right now knows there are conflicts among Christians 100%. Yeah. So this is such a great, safe first space to explore that in and figure that out, rather than in a public school where not only will it not be discussed, but it might even be squashed,
And we did a parent survey, and we found overwhelmingly that our parents want their kids to go to college, which then brings about, well, which colleges are safe now, and which colleges, my college is no longer, whatever. And so what we have found is that the school is sort of like a safer space to at least have discourse on that. And as the students get older, that widens appropriately. But what I have heard some parents say is, I definitely don't want my child going to my alma mater. I don't want them around that anymore. But what I've heard other parents say, which I think is more interesting, is I welcome my child to go to my alma mater, because then they can be a voice of reason in a place that might not be so open for that dialogue. And my child will know what they believe and why, and they'll be able to have intelligent conversations about it.
I think it's very true. I think that's something that every family has to answer that for themselves. But I think there is something to be said about a base that you probably won't get if you're just attending church on a Sunday or a youth group on a Wednesday, and that's it. If you're not hearing it, living it, looking at things with that biblical worldview daily, I think it's much harder to go into those scenarios. So I think it's great you have dialogue with your families. This seems like pretty consistently.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with this subject, Stephanie, because I wonder when you're talking about things like Catholicism and LDS and evangelicals, I mean, those are,
they're tough for adults.
Doctrinally, that's a pretty wild swing.
Right.
You don't have a statement of faith, but you obviously know what you believe and what you teach. Are there things that you say to the families, listen, and I'm assuming here, I think, are you Protestant? Is it evangelical?
Evangelical,
yeah.
Okay.
I assume then they know that that's the perspective from which you teach, and that does that ever come in conflict? Do parents say to you, hey, you've gone too far, I don't like what you're teaching here, or that's not really an option to object?
Yes, we had a family that left our school last year for the local Montessori school, and they are not religious. Their daughter loved being at the school. She was very young, though, and so a lot of these conversations were not really happening yet. But the parent came to me and said, I hear that you're talking about God and that Jesus is God's son and is present everywhere. And we pray, my daughter prays every morning to him. But I'm wondering when you're going to tell her that there are other gods and that there are other religions and that there are other ways of believing and that Christianity might not be the right one. And I said, well, we do learn about other religions. And I think in second or third grade, they start learning about Judaism and Muslims through the curriculum that we offer. And they learn about the similarities and differences and the historical background. I said, however, we will never teach that there is another alternative to God being the one true God and Jesus being his son and the Holy Spirit being a part of the Trinity, because that's what we believe. We do affirm the Nicene Creed as our statement of faith so that parents understand more specifically where we're coming from. But we would never tell a child, you're wrong, because like we said, we believe that the family is in charge of what their family believes. But we would say, this is what we're teaching here. And if you disagree, that is completely fine. But that's, we're not going to teach your way. You're going to have to get that piece of your religion from your house.
So that particular parent hadn't exactly read the literature ahead of signing up, is I guess what you're telling me, huh?
I will say we have slowly moved, in the beginning, like I said, we weren't even Christian. So that was a leap for him to even stick around.
Yeah,
and more true. Which I appreciated. And as we define more carefully who we are, that I think certain parents naturally shut off and they're like, oh, classical is a little bit harder than I thought it was.
Right.
That Christianity is a little more intense than I thought it was. And so we'll naturally find the pool of people that want to be at our classical Christians.
Which that brings me to actually what you just said. It made me think. I think it's interesting the way you've done this. I think there's maybe a misconception among a lot of people that you have to go into this formation of a school with all your ducks in a row, every question answered, every I dotted and T crossed. And you're not. And I really actually kind of commend you on that, because I think that puts people in a place of high stress. And I think you're here saying it's okay. It's okay to kind of, yes, it's okay to adjust and switch and veer. And, we're sticking to our core here, but we didn't even know what our core was quite yet because it was brand new to us. So I hope people hear that as an encouragement. And I, along with that, would love to ask you, kind of pivoting to that, what processes did you go through as you were forming? You found a barn, obviously. You started in a barn with your 20. How did you find your staff? How did you create your, just kind of your base for that first year, other than this desire of my child needs a school, so I'm going to make a school?
Right. Yes. And I would say it's not only okay to pivot, but it's absolutely going to happen. And if you think that you have to be all ready before you begin, you will never begin. It's almost like parenting. I have to be ready before I have a kid. And what I have found is that we like to say that we were building the airplane in the air. And also, we pull from not only the Bible, but literature to be guides for that. So Moses did not feel ready. Most of the leaders in the Bible did not feel ready or feel prepared. And many of them didn't want to do it at all. I mean, Jonah sulked under a tree, and God was like, get up. And also from literature, Beowulf, he goes to slay this monster, but he doesn't even have the right sword or material to do it until he's already begun his adventure. And he finds the sword that he needs on the way there to kill the dragon. So we have plenty of examples around us that give us hope and guidance. In terms of starting the school, I mean, we just, we placed ads online like, other businesses. And I got a lot of people who were not prepared to teach or who were not a good fit, but we had to take a lot of leaps. And people, especially because they didn't know classical at all. And some of them didn't even really know how to teach from a Christian perspective. So we just read a lot of articles. We watched some videos. We listened to podcasts, and we just all tried to move together to learn, what does it mean to be a classical Christian educator? So, and we're still not there. I mean, I can think of 1,000 things that I would love for us to do better and learn better. And I know that we will get there. And if I don't trust God, then I know if I didn't trust God, I just can't even imagine where I would be right now, because you just have to trust God that he will put it together in his time and the way he wants it to be. And you have to rest in that ultimately.
How many of you are there, Stephanie? How many staff, teachers?
We have about 10 staff and faculty, I think maybe 11 actually. So I am the founder and was the head of school up until last year. And then, thank God, I found the head of school to take over. I honestly didn't even mean to start this. I wanted to found the school, but I wanted to pass it to a head of school day one.
And how many students?
We have 57 students right now.
Okay.
So that's, if I'm doing the math, that's a healthier staff than I think we typically hear for a student body.
No, it's a much better ratio than a lot.
I mean, if I may, I always like to ask the money question. Is that a tuition-based stipend or salary you give the 11 that work there?
Yes. We do give a tuition. They get half off if their students attend the school.
Okay.
We are a 501c3 nonprofit. The tuition we collect doesn't even pay for the full operation of the school. So we rely heavily on donations to support the school.
So again, this is similar to some other schools we've talked to where this is a mission that it's not just a brick and mortar school. I'm assuming your teachers are not being paid salaries equivalent to the Park City education system, and yet they're there and they're learning, which I'm fascinated by. If I had to walk into a classical Christian setting, which I've tiptoed in, my sister uses that format for her children. And I read what she reads and I look at it, and I was an education major, I was a teacher, I was an English teacher, and I still am like, wow, to use a lot of that with kids. So I'm blown away by that. And I think it's intriguing, but it's missional feeling more than anything to me as I listen to you.
Absolutely. All of our staff and faculty are Christians, and I don't think they would be there if they weren't. They just find so much purpose in being there, as do we. And the name telos is actually Greek for purpose. Socrates used the word to mean the fulfillment or the end. So an acorn, its telos is to become an oak tree. That's the best possible thing that it could become. And so I think all of us at the school really feel like we are there for God's purpose.
What a story.
I love it.
And one that I think everyone can learn from. It's an evolution. This is the most honest evolution, I think, of a story we've heard.
Yes.
You have moved across the country from Montessori school to homeschool to starting a school.
Yep.
And sorting out how to navigate the starting of a school.
No, I'm blown away. I love this because at its core, this is that idea, the making the leap. This is 100% several leaps.
Impressive stuff. If people would like to reach out or learn more about you, I don't know, for some reason, maybe somebody stumbles across this in and around the Park City area, of course, I'm sure they'd like to talk to you about it. But if there are people around the country that hear this story, can they pick your brain?
Absolutely. That's, before I started this school, I found other classical schools that I could get to, and I picked their brain. And most of them said to me, I will give you everything you want. You can copy every word on our website, because this is about making money. It's not about privacy. It's about spreading great education to the rest of the world so that we can get back on the right path.
And how do you recommend people reach you?
They can email me. My name is Steph Murray, and my email address is smurray@telosclassicalacademy.org, and Telos is TELOS. You can also go to our website, telosclassicalacademy.org, and we have contact information there for not only our head of school, but the board, which I am now on. And really, you may not want to contact me. You might want to contact the head of school or one of the teachers. So
sure.
Feel free to do that as well.
Well, we'll put that in our show notes.
For
sure. Very helpful.
I really appreciate your time today, your wisdom, most of all, and your encouragement. I think just as a mom and as a parent of somebody who's, kind of finding her own way through education and figuring it out, I think this has just been a huge encouragement. We'll include everything, like we said, down in our show notes. Stephanie, thank you again so much for your time today. And as always, as you're, listening, paying attention, sharing the podcast, leaving us those 5-star reviews, always beneficial. Finding us on any of the platforms, we appreciate it. And we will see you here next week. Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.